Hello, everyone. Welcome. So right now we're just gonna wait for more people to join, and then we're gonna go ahead and get started. So welcome to the Truth Act webinar. So while we wait for more people to join, I'm going to introduce myself. So my name is Nidia Bello. I'm a community organizer with CAUSE, Central Coast Alliance United for a Sustainable Economy. And so we, for those of you that don't know, we work throughout the Central Coast from Oxnard to Santa Maria. And so again, I'm the Oxnard organizer, and today I'm here with a coalition of immigrant rights organizations that work to advocate for immigrant rights in the Central Coast, and specifically here in Ventura County. Thank you to everyone. I think we're gonna get started. So before we get started, there will be interpretation for this event in Spanish and Mixteco. So I am going to pass it on to Alice Rubalcaba, and she will explain that process. Thank you.
Thank you, Nidia. Hello, good afternoon. This is a trilingual message and we'll repeat it in English, Spanish, and Mixteco. Hola, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Ali Rubalcaba y estoy con mi compañera Carla Martens y mi compañero Fernando Hernández. Este es un mensaje bilingüe y trilingüe. Y este seminario será trilingüe y será repetido en inglés, español y mixteco. Un ambiente virtual exitoso depende de todos y todas, no solamente de los y las intérpretes. Pueden ayudar teniendo en cuenta los siguientes puntos, por favor. Hablen claramente y a un ritmo moderado. Pedimos que se mantengan en silencio y que hablen de una persona a la vez. Por favor, hablen el idioma que más se sientan cómodos y cómodas. Pedimos también que las personas bilingües no cambien de un idioma a otro. En un momento más, el anfitrión activará la función de interpretación y en la parte inferior de su pantalla podrá seleccionar el idioma que desee escuchar, español, mixteco o inglés. Si tiene algún problema con su conexión, por favor mande un mensaje en el chat al anfitrión. Gracias. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Alice Rubalcaba, and I'm here with my partners Carla Martens and Fernando Hernández. A successful trilingual environment depends on all of us, not just the interpreters. You can help by keeping a few things in mind. Speak at a moderate pace. We ask you to keep yourself muted and speak only one at a time. Speak in whichever language you feel most comfortable with. We ask that bilingual folks do not switch languages from one language to another. In a moment, the host will turn on the interpretation feature, and at the bottom right panel of the screen, you'll be able to select the language to hear the interpretation. You can choose Spanish, English, or Mixteco. This will allow you to hear the speakers in each language. If you are having any issues with the interpretation feature, please send a message to the host via chat. Now we can begin the interpretation. Thank you. Podemos activar interpretación. Gracias. Fernando.
Okay.
Fernando, you're muted. You can give the interpretation in Mixteco. Puedes empezar tu interpretación en Mixteco, Fernando. A quick announcement, un pequeño anuncio. A quien quiera escuchar interpretación en Mixteco, por favor seleccione el canal en portugués. Tenemos problemas técnicos que no pueden leer Mixteco, pero pueden seleccionar el canal portugués para que puedan, por favor, escuchar la interpretación en Mixteco. We're having technical difficulties with the assigning channel. If you want to hear the interpretation in Mixteco, please select the channel that says Portuguese. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to give a few seconds for anyone that needs interpretation to set it up. Yeah, and so I know a couple of people are asking. So this is a webinar, so therefore you will only be able to see and hear the people that are the panelists. And so everyone else, you'll be on mute, and we can't see your screen. And so that's the setup of a webinar. Since we have a lot of folks, so far we have 43 people on this webinar. And so since we have a lot of folks, this helps us, right, for it to run smoothly. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, if that's okay with everyone. And here are the panelists, if everyone's ready. So just FYI, the webinar will also be recorded. Oh, and so just again, if you need interpretation in Spanish, click on the interpretation bubble. It looks like a globe. And then you select Spanish or Portuguese if you need Mixteco interpretation. All right. And then, so again, this webinar will be recorded. We are trying to record it in all 3 languages. So please stay tuned for that. And I wanted to thank the panelists that we have here today, Salvador, Sarmiento, Angela Chan, and Julissa Peña, and as well as all the co-sponsors for the event, Buen Vecino, COST, MyCop, CLU, Ventura County LULAC, ACLU, Ventura Chapter, Surge, and Future Leaders of America. So we have a great team. This is, why we were able to make this happen, from all this collaboration. So in this webinar, we're going to have immigration experts discuss the details of SB-54 and the Truth Act and its requirements on local law enforcement. And this is to prepare us for the Ventura County Truth Act Forum that's happening next week, next Tuesday on November 17th at 4 p.m. And so the panel is going to discuss the larger meaning, right, of California as a sanctuary state with these policies. And we hope that after today, you'll join us for the Truth Act Forum next Tuesday, again at 4 p.m. via Zoom. And this is, one time a year that we get to comment and hold the sheriff accountable, and for them to, to try to get them to be transparent. Our hope, right, as the 805 Immigrant Coalition is to have no collaboration, and this collaboration between the Sheriff's Department and ICE is what contributes to the deportation machine that continues to separate our community members. So now is the time to continue to push. I know we've had some victories, right, at the federal level with Trump not being in office, but right now is the time to push forward for these progressive policies. To continue, I'm going to introduce the panelists. So we have Salvador Sarmiento from the National Campaign. He's the National Campaign Director from the National Day Labor Organizing Network, NDLON. And so Salvador is going to be discussing the political context and human rights aspects of SB-54 and the Truth Act. We also have Angela Chan. She's the Policy Director and Senior Staff Attorney with Criminal Justice Reform Program with Asian Americans Advancing Justice and the Asian Law Caucus. And Angela will be explaining the specifics of the law and how we can prepare for the Truth Act Forum. And lastly, we have Julissa Peña. She's the Executive Director with the Santa Barbara County Immigrant Legal Defense Center. And so Julissa will be addressing some of the local impacts of ICE activity and law enforcement cooperation in Ventura County and the 805. And just heads up, we will have a Q&A, a few minutes for Q&A. So for all the participants, I think you all should be able to see the Q&A button. So if at any point you have questions, click on that and then submit your questions so we can answer them at the end. So So yeah, thank you everyone. And I'm gonna hand it off to Salvador so he can get us started.
Cool, thank you, Nidia. Can you hear me okay? Okay, I'll jump in. First of all, thank you for everybody, the whole crew in Ventura that put this all together. We don't get to see each other that often in person nowadays, but it's nice to so to speak kind of be together with everybody today. The Truth Act forums, I think it's important just to say something very quickly about the Truth Act forum that you know, the statewide, these are going to be happening very soon, right after the election. And it really is an opportunity because it's so soon after the election. It's a good opportunity to remind folks what has been happening in Ventura, but also statewide, and remind folks that just because Trump presumably is on his way out, it doesn't mean that ICE has disappeared. It doesn't mean that the violations committed by ICE, facilitated by sheriffs, all of a sudden disappears. It doesn't mean that the migrant prison camps magically disappear. So it might seem obvious to everybody on this webinar, but these Truth Act forums are an incredibly important moment to make very clear, to sound the alarm that, and to remind the public at large that the actors that have been transferring thousands of people, of our neighbors, our loved ones, to these migrant prison camps, are still very much present and whatnot. So I wanted to start with a little bit of talking about, I'm gonna do my full screen here so you could see that. And let me know, Nidia or Willie, let me know if you can't see the slides.
I can see it.
Cool. First of all, it's super important that we think about this. Definitely, it's a Truth Act forum focused on what the sheriff and what the county has done in Ventura, and that's necessary. That is, you know, that's what the forum is about. But it's super important that everybody be aware that this has significance way beyond Ventura, right? The way we've been able to build the California consensus against deportations, against ICE collaboration, is because we've been able to push in all the trenches we have, right? You know, it might look very different in Los Angeles versus Fresno, but we have to push as hard as we can in every single one of these. And all the trenches that we're fighting in Ventura are no exception. And so it's important that we know what we're fighting against, right? When we talk about police ICE collaboration, it's not just something that some, you know, random sheriff came up with, right? These are strategies that are very much part of a much broader strategy called strategy of attrition, which is very much a white nationalist inspired strategy to decrease the number of immigrants of color, of refugees of color that live in the United States. And people like, I don't know if you're familiar with individuals like Chris Kobach, the former Secretary of State of Kansas, who is one of the early, what do we call them, authors, literally one of the authors of the memo on the strategy of attrition, which really says you don't have to deport all of the immigrants, you just have to make their lives miserable. And eventually they will start to self-deport, right? And so very much it's important that we know that these collaborations, every single tie, you know, the sheriff might say, you know, we're just focused on what, you know, the bad ones, or, you know, all we did was, you know, we're just sharing a little bit of information. It wasn't that bad, you know, but every single thing that the sheriff does to enable ICE, to legitimize ICE, is a signal to other sheriffs. It's a signal to all of our residents, but it's also a signal across the country to other sheriffs and law enforcement across the country that it's okay to engage and collaborate with this federal agency that manages migrant prison camps. So that is really the context that we need to really build that consensus, right? But let's talk about really specifically and really briefly, kind of what just happened in Ventura County. Many of you will remember the hate circus, right? This was in 2018, literally Southern California, some localities in Southern California were identified as the tip of the spear in Trump's anti-sanctuary, anti-immigrant strategy. You'll remember the hate circus that visited. It was, I remember it was Thousand Oaks, and it was, what was it? Camarillo and Simi Valley, right? And it's super important that they were trying to pass these resolutions or whatnot. But what's most important, they really didn't care about the resolutions or the law. They were trying to manufacture propaganda, right? And so it was necessary for them to be able to get local officials saying certain things. They needed to get images of the hate circus, with signs that said, whatever, lunacy they put on their signs. But that's really important that all of us recognize that their deliberate purpose was to manufacture a revolt against sanctuary policies. And we fought back. And that's kind of why the main point that I wanted to leave you with was that it wasn't enough that we implemented our policies. It wasn't enough that we passed SB-54. When dealing with the likes of Fox News, of the hate circus, of the people that are in and still in the White House today and still at DHS and still at ICE and will still be there under a Biden administration, it's not enough to just defend the policies and implement them. We really had to go on the offensive and push hard, not only to win in the court of law, but what we call like the court of public opinion, right? And so that's why it's super important that as we go into that truth forum and we demand kind of the specific demands that we have for the sheriff, that we're also building this narrative about ICE has no place anywhere in California, definitely not in our communities in Ventura. And so I'll leave it at that for now to keep the conversation going. But very much kind of with the call to say, it's not enough that we win in the courts or that we implement the policy. We really need to be building a much bolder policy because as you all know, what's happening in California, Texas and Florida are going in the other direction in terms of collaboration with ICE. So we need, in the places where we could build energy to kick ICE out of our cities, we need that to happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Salvador. And if folks want to have any questions for Salvador, you can, again, type it down in the Q&A section below. And now I'm going to pass it on to Angela Chan, as she will speak on the specifics of the law and how we can prepare for the Truth Act Forum.
Yes, thank you so much for organizing this webinar, and to all the folks who are getting ready to speak and make noise at your upcoming Ventura Truth Act Forum. I'm looking forward to supporting you from afar, and I'm so glad that Salvador kicked us off by just making the point that it's about our visibility. It's about making sure the immigrant rights community is visible and is, framing the debate. That's a really great place to start from, to focus from. So I'll jump into explaining more about SB-54 and also the Truth Act. And I did a little bit of analysis of Ventura County Sheriff's current policy with respect to ICE and some of the stats I was able to find for your county, and happy to answer any questions, especially via the chat box. So I'm going to share my screen now. Let's see here. Okay. And whoever's keeping time, feel free to let me know in the chat box when I'm taking too long. So first question for everyone, just for you to kind of answer in your own head. What's the primary way immigrants residing in the US are funneled into immigration detention? What's the primary way?
You can type that into the chat.
Thank you. And this is should be an easy softball question for y'all. So primary way, local law enforcement pipeline to ICE. It's local law enforcement, meaning sheriffs, police departments, also our state prison system. They are the primary ways people are funneled into immigration beds from inside the United States. About 70% of the people who are funneled into immigration beds from inside the US are through local and state law enforcement. And the way it works is ICE has put together all of these programs to try to entangle local law enforcement to do their job for them. The first is the 287G program. We luckily don't have that in California because of state sanctuary laws that we passed. But what 287G does is it actually deputizes local law enforcement to act as ICE agents. Luckily, again, we don't have that. We ended 287G, for example, in Orange County is one of the last counties to have it in California. Another program that exists, and actually this is active in California, is the Criminal Alien Program. It's a horrible name, CAP. And that allows ICE to physically enter jails and to check computer databases and to really just kind of roam about the jail. None of these programs are mandatory. Local law enforcement can certainly say no to this program and say, no, we're not allowing ICE into the jail. In San Francisco, for example, probably about a decade ago, the sheriff decided we're just not gonna let ICE in the jails anymore and ended the CAP program. Another program that's active, unfortunately, in every jurisdiction in California, with every police department, every sheriff's department, is the Secure Communities program, also known as SCOM. I think many of you know about this program already. It's when local law enforcement books someone into their jail or checks their fingerprints. The fingerprints are then sent automatically to ICE, which then does an immigration background check. And so combined, what all these programs do is they basically, turn police and sheriffs into a pipeline of sending people to ICE if they are not a citizen. And the way they do that is through just actually a simple, a simple document. I'm gonna jump ahead and go back. A simple document, it's called an ICE detainer or an ICE hold form. Here's the form. It's not a warrant. It's not signed by a judge. It's only signed by an ICE agent. It took us quite a few years of advocacy to make this clear to law enforcement, and also there's a lot of litigation around this. But these forms, these requests, ICE detainers or also ICE holds, are only voluntary. They're not warrants. They're not signed by a judge. So basically, they can be completely ignored, every single one of them. Going back here just to give you another visual, this is how the Secure Communities program works. The fingerprint is taken by local law enforcement. It goes through all these databases, and then something called a match or no match is sent back to local law enforcement from ICE, and then they issue this document, this ICE hold request. And then you'll see on this document that there's different boxes that can be checked. And the boxes can include, hey, can you hold that person for extra time for us? In California, no one can be held for extra time. That is prohibited. It also says, hey, can you notify us? Let us know when a person's going to be released from your jail. And the ICE, of course, will be showing up there to pick them up. This is allowed in California in limited circumstances. There are some exceptions. So how did we push back against all of this? Well, about 10 years ago, about 2010, actually 10 years ago, we started a coalition called ICE Out of California, which your organizations are also a part of. And ICE Out of California is basically comprised of local immigrant rights coalitions throughout the whole state that are seeking to basically stop deportations by stopping this pipeline. We started off with the Trust Act. It was a 3-year effort to just stop local law enforcement from holding people for extra time for ICE, ICE detainers. That was the first version. We fought and fought and fought. We actually tried to stop also fingerprint sharing, but we're not successful at that yet. But that was the Trust Act, and luckily it was signed into law, and that was under Governor Brown. Then came the Truth Act, which is what allows these forums to happen or requires these forums to happen. And what the Truth Act does is it was passed in 2016, went into effect in 2017, and it has a lot of requirements for local law enforcement if they decide to allow ICE into their facilities. They could just say, we're not gonna let ICE into our facilities. We're not gonna worry about any of this, right? But if they decide to let ICE in the facilities, they have to follow a lot of this. So the first is local law enforcement has to provide a copy of the ICE hold request that I just showed you. That's placed on an individual, and they have to let the person know if they're going to be responding to that request. If local law enforcement decides to give ICE access to interview someone in their custody, they also have to give that person a written consent form, and the form should have checkboxes that says you can say yes to the interview with ICE, you can say no to the interview with ICE, or you can say yes to the interview with ICE with an attorney. And it makes clear that this is voluntary, right? You don't have to agree to these interviews. And from what we've heard so far in the last several years of the Truth Act is that when local law enforcement follows this in good faith, they're actually giving these forms in the appropriate language also to the individual. There's a language access requirement here. That generally people say no. The vast majority of people say no to these interviews. So that's what we're seeing. Another piece is transparency. If you want documents, you want to request public records from your sheriff to learn more about how they are collaborating or not collaborating with ICE. Those documents are public records that you should get access to. So I've cited to the Truth Act many times in my advocacy trying to get public records and have gotten them in many cases. And lastly, of course, the Truth Act requires these Truth Act forums to happen every year. If in the prior year, the local law enforcement agency, like the Sheriff's Department, decided to work with ICE. If they decided to not work with ICE, they're not doing anything with ICE, they don't have to hold a forum. So for example, San Francisco and Santa Clara, Humboldt, and San Joaquin, all, I believe, did not have to hold a Truth Act forum this year because they did not turn anyone over to ICE under SB-54 last year. So the California Values Act, SB-54, this is the big one. This is what the ICE Out of California Coalition worked hard to pass right after Trump was elected in 2016. And the bill includes many, many provisions. I'm just going to run through some of the key provisions. One is it prohibits responses to all hold requests, meaning no one can be held for extra time for ICE, period, no exceptions. It limits, so it doesn't completely prohibit, but the default rule is you can't transfer someone to ICE, meaning you can't allow ICE into a secure or closed area of your jail so they can take somebody from you directly, from the Sheriff's Department directly. It limits responses to these things called notification requests. So that's about giving those release dates so ICE can show up at the facility in the parking lot, in the lobby to pick that person up. It also prohibits sharing of personal information, such as someone's work or home addresses. The exception there is if that information is already public. In most cases, someone's home and work address is not public, so personal information should not be shared. For the counties, especially that are at the border, it prohibits this excuse that local law enforcement uses, that they're just using ICE or CBP as interpreters. It also has a strict prohibition on asking about immigration status, and we've seen that violated quite a bit. So, watch out for that. Sheriffs and police departments cannot ask people about their immigration status, and no exceptions. It also has a clear prohibition on arresting people based on these things called civil immigration warrants, which look a lot like ICE detainers. They're not issued by a judge, they're issued by ICE, and they really have no legal effect on local law enforcement. It just basically says, do us a favor and conduct an immigration arrest for us if you see this in a law enforcement database when you pull someone over. We've seen also at least a couple cases of this where law enforcement still responded to a civil immigration warrant, even though it's prohibited, and we've sued on that. So just watch out for that also. And then it also prohibits warrantless border searches for folks in the border communities. And it's things called joint task force that I could talk all day about, but I'm not going to get into detail about. But basically, that's where local law enforcement works with the Department of Homeland Security with their joint task force operations, and says, we're going to work with you ostensibly to enforce like a gang-related issue or international drug smuggling or human trafficking, something that, you know, sounds like they're really doing criminal enforcement, but really in reality, they end up doing immigration enforcement. And so this limits cooperation with that unit of the Department of Homeland Security known as HSI. We already talked about 287G agreements. They're completely prohibited in California. And then what's been the impact of SB-54? Well, just in the first, excuse me, I'm here. In the first 5 months of SB-54, there was a 41% decrease in ICE arrests at local jails. And overall in California, there was a 24% decrease in ICE arrests throughout all of California. This number is probably higher right now. We just need to find the time to do another evaluation, but this is what we saw just in the first 5 months. And what we want is, we want to further increase, right? Increase those, further decrease those ICE arrests in local jails through holding law enforcement accountable, right? And pushing them to actually go above SB-54 and not work with ICE at all. I should have underlined that SB-54, those exceptions in it for certain crimes, those are voluntary exceptions. Local law enforcement can certainly go above this low bar, the standard set by SB-54, and say, I don't want to work with ICE, period. And that's what we're hoping anywhere it's possible in counties to make that, to turn that into a reality. And so some of the things we learned from this report that I just mentioned about SB-54 implementation, some of the things that we've seen is that some sheriffs have tried to get around SB-54 by publishing release dates online. Ventura County Sheriff has done this, and I'll explain how. Some sheriffs also have allowed ICE into private, again, secure, closed areas of their jails to conduct transfers that actually are prohibited, where the person should have been protected by 54, but they still transfer them anyways. We've also seen in some places where, well, SB-54 prohibits giving ICE their own office in the jail. It's so crazy, but that has happened. And we're seeing that some sheriffs are saying, well, fine, we won't give ICE their own exclusive office, but we'll let them share an office in our jail. So that's something we're also seeing. Not a lot though. And then we're also seeing that sometimes they will notify ICE, give ICE a release date, or give them someone's work or home address, even though it's prohibited by SB-54. So this goes to the Ventura County Sheriff's policy now. So I took a look at it, and the Ventura County Sheriff's policy, the last, looks like the current one, was adopted on January 23rd of this year, so before shelter in place. And what the policy does is it allows transfers and notifications to ICE if someone falls underneath the exceptions to SB-54. There are many exceptions to SB-54, and basically it's most felonies and many more serious misdemeanors, misdemeanors that are called wobblers. And so it's a lot of exceptions. It's 800 exceptions if you were to count all the penal codes. And so this sheriff allows those exceptions, and I think there is room, you know the politics better than I do, but I think there's room to push the sheriff to cut out these carve-outs or to narrow them. The sheriff's policy also allows ICE to interview any individuals in their custody. That's also kind of, an unfortunate thing. A lot of sheriffs have decided to not allow these ICE interviews, and this sheriff seems like he's just allowing ICE to interview anyone they'd like in their custody, but they in their policy does seem to include some of the Truth Act, like notification and written consent requirements. And again, keep in mind that the sheriff could do a lot better than this. The sheriff could decide to not work with ICE at all. And some examples of counties that don't work with ICE are San Francisco, Santa Clara, Humboldt, San Joaquin, and now, thanks to organizations like Endelon and others in LA, LA also has stopped ICE transfers. Okay, here, oops. Okay. Some other issues with the Ventura Sheriff's Department policy. I noticed that it's pretty sparse in saying what's prohibited by SB-54. It's kind of focused on what is allowed, by 54, and it doesn't spend much time saying what's prohibited, and that can certainly get them in trouble because they need clear direction to all their deputies to not engage in any of the prohibited activities under SB-54. So it doesn't actually explicitly prohibit holding people for extra time on an ICE hold request. That's going to get them into some serious trouble because it's also Fourth Amendment constitutional issues when someone's being held not based on an ICE warrant. Not based on a criminal warrant that's signed by a judge, based only on an ICE warrant or an ICE detainer. It also doesn't explicitly prohibit immigration arrests based on civil immigration warrants, which I just talked about. That's very problematic also, because I have seen in the field some law enforcement actually responding to these civil immigration warrants. And so they need clear direction. They can't do this. And so what that has mean in terms of the way this policy has been structured is that really it seems to encourage local law enforcement, the Sheriff's Department, to work with ICE. So in 2018, the Sheriff's Department reported that to the California Attorney General's office that they transferred 69 community members to ICE. In 2019, a similar number, 67 people to ICE. I work kind of throughout the whole state on this issue, and I would say this is towards the higher end of the number of transfers sent, a number of people transferred to ICE. So it is concerning. And then the Ventura Sheriff's Department also does publish release dates online. Some sheriff's departments just print out a list of release dates and names and put them online, like the Contra Costa Sheriff's Department. I would say that's like the worst because you just have a PDF list there. This sheriff actually goes at least a tiny step above it, and you have to enter the person's first and last name to get the release date information. But for ICE, that's not that difficult to do, right? And they could also racially profile and enter, immigrant, quote unquote, sounding last names to get release date information. So it is concerning that they're doing that. I think this is my last slide here before I give you my contact information. So some messages to keep in mind as you prepare for your Truth Act forum, as you prepare for the public comments that you'll be giving. One is that this police ICE or sheriff ICE collaboration, it violates due process, right? People can be turned over to ICE in the middle of their criminal proceedings before they've had a chance to even fight any criminal charges, or even after criminal charges are dropped or not filed. And so it totally violates due process for immigrants who are in contact with the criminal system. It also subjects immigrants to double punishment. If someone was not an immigrant, none of these things would happen. They would not be interviewed by ICE. They would not be turned over to ICE by the Sheriff's Department. And so that's something that is unequal and unfair to point that out. And it's important to point that out to the Sheriff's Department. Of course, it tears families apart, right? You have a community member now who's not only incarcerated, but they're also facing time in immigration detention and facing potential permanent separation from their family, sometimes deported to very dangerous conditions. It also undercuts what's supposed to be, what's presented as the rehabilitative goals of the criminal system, so that people don't get in trouble again. Unfortunately, when someone is turned over to ICE, there is no chance to get any sort of programs or services, if there is any, in the criminal justice system. It wastes local and state resources, right? It's not the job of the Sheriff's Department to engage in immigration enforcement. If they wanted to do that, they could go, unfortunately, become ICE agents. They do not need to work for the Sheriff's Department. They have enough issues of their own in terms of their issues with excessive force, with wrongful arrest, with terrorizing our communities as sheriffs and sheriff deputies, much less to add this to their plate. And it also, of course, creates distrust in the community. And we've kind of modified this message through the years. In the past, we've just kind of said it creates distrust in the communities. But I think another thing to note is that sometimes there wasn't trust there in the first place because of how law enforcement treats Black and Brown communities. And this kind of further erodes that lack of trust. And so that's it. Feel free to ask me any questions in the chat box. I think there's probably a ton of questions. I just haven't been able to look at it while I'm showing the presentation. But happy to answer any questions, and I'm excited for you guys to make a lot of noise and to be very present at the Truth Act Forum coming up next week.
Thank you so much, Angela. And then if folks, again, if you have a question, there's the Q&A button. And yeah, if people want to give some love to the panelists, the presenters, go ahead and do so in the chat as well. And so again, thank you, Angela. I'm going to be handing it off to Julissa now.
So hi, everyone. So I will be talking briefly about some of the local data that we've been able to gather of about ICE enforcement activity locally. And so the Santa Barbara County Immigrant Legal Defense Center, also known as the ILDC, manages a rapid response team and system in partnership with CAUSE to trace ICE enforcement activity in the SB and Ventura County areas. Also to alert immigrant communities of ICE presence locally, and to connect individuals who have been arrested by ICE with the SB County Immigrant Legal Defense Center to provide them with deportation defense or any other legal services that they need to get out of detention if they are bond eligible. So today I will briefly explain the ICE enforcement patterns that we've seen locally in the past year in the SB and Ventura County areas. And so one thing I do want to emphasize is that despite the ongoing fight with COVID-19 and the terrible conditions in detention centers, ICE has not stopped making arrests in the SB and Ventura County areas. They have decreased, but not completely stopped. And so that's very important. That's something that we definitely need to be alert of, right? And manage. And so this system, this rapid response system helps us keep track of that despite COVID-19. So in the last year, we've seen that the majority of the people arrested by ICE has been subject to a final order of deportation. But what's been different and about ICE enforcement activity and issuing these reinstatement orders of deportation is that these final orders of deportation were issued 5 to 10 years or more ago. So it's definitely very surprising and unfortunate because of where we're located. It's very challenging to stop these deportations and file a stay of removal on time. But something that's related to today's webinar is that we've also seen a lot of individuals who have been released from county jail for minor offenses and charges are being picked up by ICE soon after, most of the time, no later than a week or 2 weeks after being released. So this is very important because it shows that people who are not considered an exception to SB-54, ICE transfers, which is something that Angela just explained, is still being tracked down by ICE, right? And so it just means that it shows that ICE and the Sheriff's Department are just becoming more clever, are strategizing in different ways outside of SB-54 to still track down people who have no status, right? And so this is very important data because it shows that there is some sort of collaboration and communication still going on between these two agencies, right? Between sheriffs and the ICE department. And so it definitely needs to stop. This is something we're still tracking, but these two patterns have been pretty overwhelming. And so, yeah, so this is just very brief info about our local enforcement activity data that we've been able to gather. If you have any other questions, yeah, I'm here. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Julissa. So thank you to Salvador, Angela, and Julissa for speaking on SB-54, the Truth Act, and yeah, and the local, how this shows up locally right here in Ventura County. So I think we're gonna get started with questions. So we will do as many as we can get through. There are a couple. So the first one is by Lisa. And so she asked, what specific questions do you hope suggest that we will ask at the forum? So yeah, I don't know if the panelists will take would like to take this question on.
I was just gonna, it looks like there's a lot of questions. Does it make sense to say one or two questions, two, and then jump in? I don't know if Angela or Julissa, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, for this question, I'm actually pulling up some, there's, because there are many Truth Act forums, right? For what Truth Act forums for many different counties, we have lots of examples of suggested questions. I would say if I were to boil it down, it would be, will you stop working with ICE, right? We're very disappointed that there are over 60 transfers, almost 70 transfers to ICE in each of the last 2 years. Can you commit to stop working with ICE and actually, protect and I guess not protect, but to basically not be ICE agents. So I will find some more questions here that I'll just copy and paste into this box. For this year, given COVID too, we've been using that as a push point and saying, if someone, how do you know if an individual hasn't contracted COVID and that you're transferring them into another facility, immigration detention, where COVID is rampant? And will you make an exception there? Will you make an exception if someone's elderly and is more susceptible to COVID? Will you make an exception if someone has medical issues that make them more susceptible to COVID? So pushing around the edges if the sheriff is very staunch in saying that he'll still work with ICE.
And then I think I would also like to say that for those interested in the Truth Act Forum, it is next Tuesday on the 17th. It's open for the public. And this is, why it's so important that all of you are here, because we hope that you will show up at the Truth Act Forum. And so I'll post the link, and we will, 805 Immigrant will be sharing like other talking points and other questions that you all could possibly ask at the forum. And so so those will be posted or shared before the forum.
If I might add something about the questions that you think about for the sheriff, one way of thinking about this is that there used to be a saying about, it's not enough to tell the story of the battle, the story about what happened. There's also a battle for the story. Like there's a battle between the community and the sheriff and ICE about which version of the story is going to be told. And the truth forums are a great opportunity for us. It's an organizing opportunity for us to tell a story about what is happening. But if we're not smart about it, it's also a platform for the sheriff. And so the sheriff can go up there and say, defend his policies and say, look, it's only 60 or 70 people, and it's the dangerous criminal alien, the fugitive aliens, or whatever the heck racist phrase they use. Right? And so if we're not careful, we're just letting the sheriff tell his version of the story. And so it's really important that as we think about those questions, Angela will share some. I think in the questions, to make clear, for example, 60 people is 60 too many that are being sent to ICE's migrant prison camps, right? So every question, you're building up a story, like the community needs to, and I would think about the questions, but also, is there anything else that you can do to help build that story, that narrative, whether it's in a press release or a Facebook Live that's going to happen before the Truth Forum, or whatever, but basically ways to make sure that your story, the community's version, is told either in every single question or in a COVID safe car caravan the morning of the Truth Forum or something like that,
Thank you, Salvador. There is another question. About the online posting, this is by Nan Walker. About the online posting of release dates, did that start with SB-54 as a workaround? if we could get sheriffs to stop, how would families be notified of their loved ones' release dates, which is the reason the sheriffs gives for posting online?
Yeah, I'm not sure actually when a Ventura County Sheriff's Department started posting release dates. I can say that generally of the 58 counties, many of these more conservative sheriffs started posting release dates right after SB-54 was signed into law. For example, that happened in Contra Costa County, and I believe also in Marin County. I'm wondering if the Ventura County Sheriff also did that. They are coordinated through the California Sheriff's Association. They have their own attorney in that association, and they meet frequently in weird, obscure locations. So I'm pretty sure it was probably coordinated. And then in terms of what would be the alternative, one alternative is to require more information be entered before that release date information can be given, right? Not just the first and last name, but the first name, last name, birthday, any other identity, there's something called an inmate number, any other information. So it makes it tougher for ICE to try to, search through the website for that information. Another way is actually, I think, more narrow. That's that individual who's detained, for them to give the contact information for the family member or designatee that they would like to get information about their release date, and for the sheriffs to, proactively contact them and give them that information. That would be, the best if possible.
Thank you, Angela. I think that's a really great alternative and something we've struggled with, because that's the answer that we get from the Sheriff's Department often. Thank you. So Nicolette Walker is asking how have the transfers changed during COVID?
So to my knowledge, they haven't. That's a good question actually to ask the Ventura County Sheriff's Department. But from our monitoring of sheriffs and also of our state prison system, they are business as usual when it comes to conducting ICE transfers. There might be a slight decrease is my guess, but they're definitely not stopping ICE transfers for those counties that are still engaging in that practice. This is a good opportunity to really push them on this and to underscore the public health impacts, not only to the individual and to other people detained, but also to the broader community when someone is transferred to ICE during a pandemic.
Thank you. And I think this is specific for Ventura County. So if Ventura County allows ICE interviews, does it also allow the sharing of fingerprints to ID potential targets? Yes.
It does. Ventura Secure Communities, this fingerprint sharing program, is active for every single law enforcement agency in the country, including throughout California, even in sanctuary cities like San Francisco. And what we're trying to do is on the back end, get the sheriffs just to say no to the ICE hold, transfer, and notification requests that are generated by that fingerprint sharing program.
Thank you. And then Nicole Living asks, who has standing to sue ICE when they violate these policies?
Okay, so who has standing? Well, so we would actually be suing not ICE, although there are ways you can find ways to sue ICE, but we'd be suing the Sheriff's Department. And so right now, for example, we're poised to sue the Sacramento Sheriff's Department for violating SB-54. We're probably going to get a settlement today, keeping fingers crossed. But we have sued and have gotten settlements. There's currently a pending lawsuit that we have against the Daly City Police Department for violating SB-54. So we're certainly litigating this. If you hear of a violation or a potential violation, feel free to let me know. We can do a deeper analysis to see if that's the case. And then we could help, with potentially litigating it. There is a statute of limitations. So there's a time limit. So within 6 months of the person getting transferred or the notification happening or being held for extra time for ICE or arrested on an immigration warrant, we have to file a complaint with the county. So within 6 months of that incident. If we wait past 6 months, it's we're probably past time to file it.
All right, thank you, Angela. So Nan also asks, if Julissa, can you clarify how a person released from jail is in the community? Or yeah, how a person released from the community is located by ICE with the help of the sheriff?
We have no idea. We're guessing they still use that online resource, right? And so I think sheriff still facilitates, you know, those release dates and makes them public. And so I think that's the way that they're doing it. Not sure. I mean, we have seen in the past, actually, when we've been investigating ICE presence in the community, we've noticed them in communication in person as well, sheriffs and ICE. And so we're not sure if there's communication going on now outside of it between them, you know, between those two agencies, but that's still something we're trying to, figure out. We're not exactly sure. This is probably a really important question, right, to make at the Truth Act Forum. But we're guessing it's the online resource and some other way that we're still not quite sure.
Thank you, Julissa. And so Amy, this will be the last question since it's almost 1 and our webinar ends at 1. But Amy Reed mentioned that the Sheriff's Department just posted that the information for the Truth Act Forum won't be posted until 14 days from now, not 10. And so she was asking if there's a way for us to press them for a quicker response for that information.
I'll defer to the folks in Ventura working on the forum, but I think for other counties, we just pester the Sheriff's Department and the Board of Supervisors to get that information sooner rather than later.
Yeah, so I would say the same thing. If you can, email the Sheriff's Department and the Board of Supervisors and as much pressure as we can get to get them to post the release or to release that that information before the Truth Act. Yeah. All right, everyone. So those are all the questions that we can take for today. Before we end, I just want to say thank you to all the panelists, to all the to all the organizations, to all the individuals that are here, to everyone that came. We really do appreciate it. We know it's a hectic time, but we know that the work, this never stops, and we have to continue, right? And this is the time for us to attend the Board of Supervisors meeting and really hold them accountable, hold the sheriffs accountable, and seek transparency. And so again, if you're interested in the forum, the link was posted on the chat. If someone can post it again, and that so you all can register. And we will keep you all updated. So thank you, everyone. You will be getting a follow-up email with the recording and any other information. So thank you.